Hello, I think we are ready. So, welcome to this new EUROPARC webinar on creating bee-friendly cities. And we'll look today at how we can bring pollinators back to our urban areas. My name is Esther Bossink. I am EUROPARC's Communications Officer, and I will guide you through this webinar today. And the webinar is part of the Live Urban Greening Plans project. So what we'll focus on today is really the how and the why we should bring pollinators back into our urban areas. And we'll dive into the importance of wild bees, and then we will also look at the city of Utrecht, who became the municipality of Utrecht that became the most bee-friendly municipality in the Netherlands. Now, just before we're getting started, a few housekeeping rules. You are currently muted, and it will stay that way just so we are making sure that there's as little background noise as possible. However, that in no way means that we want you to keep quiet. We're very open to questions or comments, or if you have any interesting material you would like to share, please use the Zoom chat box for that. And after every presentation, there will be a few minutes where it's possible for you to pose some questions. So very welcome to write your questions in the chat. Of course, we always like to get to know you, and please feel free to rename yourself. You can do that by finding yourself in the participant list and going on the More button or the 3 little dots. And then you can change your name and even indicate your organization. And indeed, this webinar is being recorded. If you don't feel comfortable potentially appearing on the recording, then you're of course free to turn off your webcam or your camera. I will keep mine on because I do like seeing the faces of others, even when I'm in the Zoom room. And of course, you're welcome to choose whatever you prefer. As I was saying, I'm working for the EUROPARC Federation. Just a little bit of information about us. We are the largest networking organization of protected areas in Europe, and we have 8 different sections and 3 different offices throughout Europe as well. We have around 400 members from 40 countries, and it includes national parks, regional nature parks, marine protected areas, and of course, urban and peri-urban parks. And our aim is to support the work of our members by organizing networking events like conferences, but also learning opportunities like workshops or these webinars. And of course, we present their work at EU level through our office in Brussels, and try to dialogue and lobby, or as some people might call it. And as I was saying, this webinar is part of the Live Urban Greening Plans project, and the Live Urban Greening Plans project aims to design innovative mechanisms to plan, implement, strengthen, manage green infrastructures in peri-urban areas. We have very interesting things coming up, so I do welcome you to have a look at the website. And the project really is there to support city planners in making their urban areas greener and more biodiversity friendly. Now, I don't want to take any more of your precious time, so we're now going to move to Etienne Olot, and he will do a little bit of scene setting and focus on the importance of bringing back pollinators to our urban areas. So Etienne, I will stop sharing and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Esther. Good afternoon, everybody. I will share my screen. Esther, is it okay?
Yep, now it's great. Thanks.
So good afternoon. So my name is Etienne Olot. I'm working for a public authority, the Brussels Administration for the Environment in the Green Space Division. And yes, EUROPARC asked me to, let's say, set the scene. And I will just tell you, explain a little bit about the challenge and the problem we face for implementing a pollinator strategy, because of course we need to implement and to build a pollinator strategy for our city, I think like in most of the city, but we clearly face some challenge and we need to find solution for that. So I will just put on the screen, I mean, like in every city, a city is a complex ecosystem, of course, and so I just put some number for those who don't know, but Brussels is more than 1 million inhabitants, and of course we have the main challenge we have is the very dense traffic infrastructure and the ongoing fragmentation of habitat of green spaces. So we have developed the so-called Brussels Ecological Network, and this is based on the map you see on the links. But of course, building such ecological network is not really easy. As you know, there is a real pressure on green area. Even if we say that Brussels is green because we totalize 50% of green area within our city, I think you have to know that 50% of those green areas are private. So you can imagine the challenge we have because we need to negotiate voluntary agreements or biodiversity partnership with the main with most of the other authority, but also with the private sector. And it's really not an easy thing in order to promote and to enhance ecological management of green spaces. And of course, there is an unequal distribution of green area. And I think it's, for most of the city, the problem they face, because if you see in the centrum of Brussels, for example, we have almost no green area, and the main green area are located in the surrounding of the city. So you can directly imagine that, of course, not every citizen is equal in terms of connectivity to green area and to green spaces, but there will be also a problem for building an ecological network in the centrum of Brussels due to the lack of green spaces. And so for us, it's a kind of story. I would just tell you how we have implement, or we try to implement, our pollinator strategy. So we have been inspired by EU strategy, and you know the EU pollinator initiative, and we really encourage this initiative to go further because this initiative is built on, as you maybe know, or you should know, 3 pillars. So it's knowledge, it's action, and it's awareness communication. So we just copy paste the same skeleton, let's say, and we develop based on this skeleton, I mean, our implementation action plan. But here it's a message maybe to go further, because we really need to boost this networking and the exchange of practices, of guidance manual, of frame document between partners and cities. And we need, of course, to develop the scientific knowledge to better know pollinator with a S and the ecology, in order, of course, to match the strategy we will develop for pollinator with the reality and the geographical scope of the city and the problem we face within cities. So it's a message to go further and maybe to launch a kind of boost networking and exchange between city, because I think it's the main most interesting things we can develop together. And I refer to some documents that IUCN has published with based on the knowledge they have on pollinator. And so our strategy in Brussels, we cannot build another strategy because we have a lot of strategy for sustainable building, nature plan, pesticide program, good food strategy, etc. So this pollinator strategy needs to be clearly integrated into other strategy. And you can directly see that there could be some competition, of course. For example, if I mention the good food strategy, it's for promoting urban farming and ecological practice. Even if it is an urban area, we still have some agriculture activities. And so we need, for example, the good food strategy say they want to promote the local product and the seasonal product, as you know. And when they say promoting local product, you directly think also about honey, for example. And so what we saw in the past, we saw a huge development of activity based on hives and honeybees, also commercial one. So we see company developing new ID, innovative product or services based on honeybees. And so, for example, they promote the renting and the leasing of hives, and they put hives on the roof of the top of companies. Of course, a very interesting initiative, but you can directly imagine that in the centrum of Brussels, where there is a clear lack of green spaces, that we will face a kind of competition between pollinator. And so we have to work with the other strategy in order to have a mutual, understanding of the action we would like to implement. For example, this question, we need to find an answer as quickly as possible, because how many beehives can we accept it in Brussels regarding the ongoing development of hives that we already have in Brussels, especially in the centrum, as I say, where there is a lack of green spaces. So this is a clear question, and we do not have, a clear answer until now, because we still miss some data and some better knowledge of ecology of the different pollinator in order to be able to say we can accept a certain number of additional hives in Brussels. And this is a slide I just take from Nicolas, that will be the other speaker just after me. So this is just to show you that, yes, we need an holistic approach and an ecosystem approach instead of a single entry door. We have a lot of pollinator in Brussels. You see the chart that illustrates the number of pollinators for the whole Belgium and the one in Brussels. BCR is Brussels Capital Region for one domestic honeybee, as you know. So we need to take into account all species, the ecology, the kind of ecosystem they want in order to build a coherent ecological network. And this is the problem now we clearly face, and we should take this into account, and not only to have one single flagship for biodiversity, which was before the honeybees. I know everybody know that the first image you see for showing and explaining biodiversity was before the honeybee. Now we have to choose maybe another flagship or another set of flagships in order to better illustrate biodiversity. And so as I say, we just get inspired by the EU strategy, and we build our regional strategy on 3 pillars. So better knowing, and I think Nicolas is one of our subcontractors, is working for us also to better identify the different wild bees we have, to better know the ecology. And we also launch other study like street bees, to know, the bees that they have the ecosystem on the ground, to better know where they are, who they are, etc. And so this is the first step we need to develop, is to have a better and a clearer knowledge of the different species we have and their ecology before starting acting and aware and communicate, or at least it is the first step. And so this is my last slide, is just to say that we co-develop with the help of Nicolas and other experts, of course, the strategy based on the triangular knowledge, as I say. So to better know how many population of honeybee do we have right now, and how many can we accept in the future, for not entering into competition with other pollinator, because we have to combine all the different species in one single strategy, in order to avoid, of course, the food competition, especially, as I say, in the centrum of Brussels, for example, and also to tackle all the problem like the disease transmission and the pressure we have on the green spaces. And so we need to put in place a monitoring and an evaluation of the food potential we have. And so we clearly need to work on the typology to better identify the type of vegetation of green spaces we have, and to see exactly and to manage to avoid any competition between those different categories of pollinator. So it was more an exchange of challenge that we have as Brussels, but I think many cities are just face the same challenge as we have, and we are just at the starting point for developing our strategy, but we already have, as I said, the other strategy like nature plan. But it's the starting point with the first knowledge and the first implementation, the building of the first implementation action plan. So of course I remain available for question. But my last word will be, we are fully open, of course, as I say, to exchange with other cities, to exchange best practice, to work on different guidance manual, on public tendering, for example, so technical clause, etc. So if you are interested, just send me a mail and I will be really happy to discuss a potential EU project bringing together different cities.
Thank you very much, Etienne. Thank you for starting off this webinar with all that Brussels is doing or aiming to do. I already have a question for you, actually, coming from the audience, and it's if Brussels is only focusing on bees or also other species groups of pollinators like wasps, flies, or moths.
Yes, we try to integrate all of them, of course. It's, as I say, an integrated ecosystem approach, including all species. But it's not easy to do because we, as I say, we clearly miss some knowledge on the ecology of different species. We monitor some of them, but not all of them. So we first need to fill this gap before being able to implement a practical action plan.
Sure, thank you. If there's any other questions, do feel free to keep them coming as well. Okay, sorry, it's just a question from Gitti. If there's anybody in the audience that is from Germany, please do feel free to answer her question if there's about if all beekeepers are registered. If there's any other questions coming up for Etienne, then do not hesitate to still post them. You can just post them in the chat and then just indicate to whom you would like your question to be answered. And then, if I don't,
sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Etienne. Please stop sharing, because we're moving on to our second speaker, Professor Nicolai Vereken, and he will focus on why we urgently need a pollinator's perspective in developing ecological infrastructures, and he will especially look at the wild bee. So, Nicolai, the floor is all yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Esther. Can you all see my presentation in full screen now?
Yeah, now it's in full screen. Perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Bruxelles Environnement for their continuing support, because I think we are really lucky in Brussels. So yes, again, I'm going to talk about what's going on in Brussels. So you will have a Brussels overdose today. Sorry, folks. But we've been really, really lucky to have Brussels Environment with us, because they've been really supportive in a climate where, as Etienne said, the whole focus was on honeybees. And if you take the city of Paris, for instance, well, they also have a bee plan, or plan B, but it's mostly focusing on honeybees. And I think it's been very courageous from Bruxelles Environnement to try to listen to us scientists and to trust us, and also to see that we were capable of gathering citizen scientists and other sorts of stakeholders together around the table to work together towards the acknowledgement of the importance of wild bees and wild pollinators in our cities. So I have a very difficult task to try to give you an overview of some of the things we've been up to. So fasten your seatbelts, because we're about to start. What I would like to emphasize is that we really need to take the pollinators' perspective in order to manage our urban green spaces for now and also for the future. You all know that insect decline is a major issue today, and so and bees, of course, are one of the most important targets, one of the most visible targets, and perhaps it's a good chance and a good opportunity to try to tackle the source of our problems while listening or while looking at wild bees a bit more in detail. And for the question of urbanization, it's pretty obvious. Usually we we consider that urbanization is taking a completely different route as opposed to a road to biodiversity. And so there's this contrast between these two views. I'm sure that most of you know that this is not always the case, but it's still prevalent in many people's mind. And I think that if you convert a meadow into a parking lot, that's a pretty obvious a change of habitat that's not going to be beneficial for biodiversity. This is a nice part of Brussels, but as you can see, the remaining patches of urban green spaces are pretty tiny. And so the question is there still room for wild bees and other pollinators in these areas? And that's what we've been up to, considering that wild bees also are often associated to pollution, and that in those few urban green spaces, there's very little to drink and very little to eat. So it's a huge challenge, actually, for wild bees to be able to thrive in cities. And so I would say that a popular view that I borrow from my grandma would be that there's probably 1 or 2 species of bees in Brussels because the city is very urbanized. And although there's some green spaces in the surroundings, maybe it's already too urbanized for wild bees. That's a challenge, actually. And it's a research question that was formulated by my grandma a few years ago, because my grandma, as everybody knows, the bee. And what is the bee? Well, it's Apis mellifera. It's the bee we have in the hives, the bee that produces delicious honey. It's also the bee that's capable of stinging you and making you cry during the summer if you get stung. So we have a sort of a sweet and sour relationship with this species. But remember and keep this in mind: this is one and only one species we're talking about, whether it be Italian or from or the black honeybee. That's always the same species. This is Apis mellifera. Everybody knows the bee, but actually very few people know the bees with an S, and that's what we want to try to change. We want to make sure that people develop another search image or another mental image for the diversity of bees, because they are really highly diverse in terms of shapes, of forms, of behaviors, of connections to very particular plants. And this is very different from the spring. For instance, here you have a poster that I've made a few years ago for some very popular spring bees in Brussels, and also for summer bees in Brussels. And if you take some time, you will see that these are all relative to their original size. And so you can see that we have a whole kaleidoscope of shapes, colors, and behaviors and other plants that are key to their survival. So it's a really complex ecological network that we have to understand in order to manage our urban green spaces properly. There's even more species than that, because at the European level, we've been compiling all the information, and we found that there's over 2,000 species of bees at the European level. And it's a very high concern for me too, because I'm now the overall lead of the freshly launched wild bee specialist group of the IUCN. So conservation of European bees is very much on top of my heart, on top of my list of things to do. One question is, how many species of bees are there? I told you my grandma had in mind that there were only 2 species of bees in Brussels. Well, it turns out that we have more than 400 species of bees recorded at the scale of Belgium. I told you 2,000 species in Europe, 20,000 species at the worldwide scale. And of those, the honeybee is just one species. Keep that in mind. And this is the result we have now after our Atlas project on the bees of Brussels that was generously funded by Bruxelles Environnement. Again, thank you very much for that. We have recorded now 210 species just at the scale of the Brussels capital region, which is more than half of all the bees we have at the scale of the country, which really shows that we're not talking about 2 species trying to thrive in the back of a backyard. It's a very diverse community of bees, and we have to take these into account, including their ecological requirements. It's a lot more than many other groups that are of conservation concern. Look at the number of orchids, odonata, butterflies, and nesting birds in Belgium, where if you compare these figures with the number of bees, it's pretty clear to me that there's a really important biodiversity issue here that we need to tackle really urgently. Some facts about bee decline are necessary here because as you know, bees are having a relatively bad buzz, but not all the time and not everywhere. And we know that from the first European red list of the IUCN of the wild bees of Europe, we know that urbanization is a really important driver of decline of those bees. And so there's also a really important issue to be addressed in urban environments. And at the Belgian scale, we know that, well, we've lost a lot of species. And despite the fact that we still have 210 species in Brussels, a lot of them are virtually on the brink of extinction. So the conservation concerns are really high. One thing that you have to keep in mind is that the honeybee is just one species, and it's also one species that is probably the least threatened of all species of Europe. And this is not because Morgan Freeman has decided to set up some initiatives to protect honeybees. That has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that the number of beehives has been increasing over time and is at least relatively stable in most regions despite the winter losses, because the beekeeping sector is capable of overcoming the winter losses. And so there are millions and millions and millions of bees around. They are under protection of beekeepers, and so this is clearly evidence that the honeybee is far from being threatened, and it's also far from being the best representative of all pollinators. You know, for a long time we've been thinking, or we've heard at least, that the honeybee had issues, and that if we were to look into those issues and to solve them, we would be basically solving all the problems for all the wild bees. Well, it's not true. And we have investigated this in particular, and this is explained in this paper published last year. The biology and the ecology of the honeybee is so special that it's a completely different organism, a completely different species, and a lot of the peculiarities of the threats are different between the honeybees and the wild bees. And also, if you compare the winter losses at the European scale with the threatened species of wild bees at the European scale, there is no spatial match at all. So these are two very different issues. And again, it shows that we should highlight the importance of wild bees, and more attention should be drawn on wild bees. Furthermore, we know now that that honeybees, of course, they produce nice honey, and everybody loves honey, right? But we also know that setting up hives or increasing the number of hives locally can have detrimental effects, because the honeybees, when there are no hives, there will still be a few honeybees around. But when you set up beehives, then you will be increasing the local number of honeybees, and they will start visiting the same local plants as the wild bees and the other pollinators. And this is going to be a potential source of competition. I'm not saying that it's competition everywhere and all the time, but it's a high probability of witnessing a competition between the domesticated, the managed honeybee and the wild pollinators. We've been investigating this in Brussels also, and these are results that are still being analyzed. And you see in yellow the honeybee. So the prevalence of the honeybee can vary, of course, from one location to the next. And this is currently being investigated with a bit more detail. But what I can tell you right now is that the overlap in the floral resources between the honeybee and the wild bees is a source of competition. And each species competes with the other ones for the access to food. And each species is also subject to competition by other species. And so you can characterize each species of bee in Brussels by these two indices: the competition experienced and the competition exerted on the other species. And if you make a rank classification of all the bee species in Brussels, you will see that the honeybee, and also to some extent all the social honeybees, are the most fierce competitors in terms of resource exploitation. That means the collection of pollen and nectar. So we should really be careful about how many hives we set up locally and the extent to which it can harm the populations of honeybees. This is of wild bees. These are results from Brussels, of course. So urban bees, now you know that it's not just about one or two species, but we've been wondering actually if the urban green spaces in Brussels were super green and super clean, or if there was still some work to do on this front as well. And we've started these investigations on urban bees a couple of years ago with this. It's not a pioneering study, but it's a study that's becoming more and more popular, where we investigated the role of different urban green spaces in Montreal and in Quebec, and we've really shown the importance of having all of these different kinds of urban green spaces, because each urban green space has its own unique contribution to the local diversity of bees. So look at here, urban cemeteries, community gardens, urban parks. We have the same trend in Brussels with nature reserves and with community gardens that are of importance. So again, Brussels is really a garden city at the heart of Europe. 2,010 species of bees recorded thanks to our collective effort with NGOs and with citizen sciences. And we have highlighted the fact that community gardens are actually as diverse as the urban nature reserves, which was a really big surprise, and which also offers a lot of opportunities in terms of management, because creating a new nature reserve in the city is a bit complicated. When you have a food production strategy at the regional level, maybe organizing some green spaces to devote a little bit of space to a vegetable garden could be something a bit more feasible. That's the result we have from Brussels. You see the same number of species in community gardens and in urban nature reserves, and each urban green space category has its own contribution, unique contribution to the diversity of bees, including some rare and fascinating bees, of which I don't have time to explain the whole biology, but it's fascinating, trust me. One last thing we've done is that we've developed a pioneering study on using wild bees as environmental detectives, also to address the question of the extent to which the urban green spaces are clean, and by clean I mean devoid of pesticides at the regional level. We've used two species that are really popular: Osmia cornuta, very popular in Europe, and Osmia bicornis, also very popular in Europe, and they tend to nest in small bee hotels. And so we have set up bee hotels at the scale of the region on 50 sites, so 50 sites along an urbanization gradient. So each site has been selected according to its surroundings, its landscape context. So we have some sites that are surrounded by green spaces all over the place, and others that are surrounded by concrete, basically. And we have set up these bee hotels everywhere. We've let the females do their job. Here you have another view of the different sites that we have selected with the percentage of urban green spaces within a 250 meters radius. We've let the females collect pollen, laying their eggs, the eggs transformed into beautiful little larvae. That's my perspective, at least. And then we have removed the pollen from those bee hotels that we had set up, and we have analyzed the contents of those bee hotels. We've been sequencing the pollen to see which plants were visited. And so you have here a number of plant genera that are associated to each bee hotel at those 50 locations. A number of plant families, of course, also. So we are in the process of evaluating the extent to which the landscape can also predict the diversity and the richness of host plants that are used by those solitary bees. This has been done through a pollen metabarcoding approach, and here are just a few results. So those two little solitary bees, they visited a spectrum of 48 genera of plants in 34 families of plants. That's enormous, and it's never been described as diverse as this, and no effect of urbanization gradient on the number of plant genera or on the number of plant families. We didn't stop there because we thought that we had a good basis for pesticide residue analysis. So we've also analyzed the contents of those bee nests for the pesticide residues for 49 samples with my colleagues at the University of Ghent. And basically we've put together the pollen metabarcoding and the pesticide residue data, and we are now in the process of analyzing the whole database according to the different urban green spaces categories, the urbanization gradient, the different types of pesticides that we found there. And just as a little note on this, we found 85.71% of our samples contained at least one active substance. So almost all of the samples we have analyzed contain pesticides, and more often more than one molecule. We found 2 pesticides that were particularly prevalent and that are a bit worrying, actually. One is boscalid, which is an insecticide and an acaricide, and it's also toxic to bees. And the other one is chlorpyrifos, which is also problematic, including with a certain level of toxicity towards honeybees. We haven't found any relationship to the landscape, so no effect of the landscape on the diversity of pesticides, or a priori there's no connection to any kind of particular plant. But these are still being analyzed right now by my team, who are now applying machine learning analysis to investigate the covariance of pesticide residues and pollen identity. So in a nutshell, I hope I made things clear that we really need to shift our focus towards wild bees, because this is where the conservation concerns are, and this is where we know that there's a lot of ecological requirements that need to be filled at the scale of the cities. So we've been worrying about the wrong bees for a long time, and I think it is now time, including within European networks of cities, to start collectively worrying about wild bees across sectors, using universities, NGOs, citizen science projects, and hopefully, if you're as lucky as us, having your local authorities like Bruxelles Environnement with you, then there will be hope to engage into a really ambitious network of researchers. And this is the aim, really to shift our attention away from the honeybee, which is doing fine and which is producing nice honey and what have you, but it's not connected to any kind of biodiversity issue. And this is another image from my colleagues in the UK, saying that raising honeybees to save pollinators is like raising chickens to help birds. Once each and every one of you has this clearly into your mind, I think we will make significant progress, and you will all understand that before willing to save the bees by doing something random, we have to know the bees and to understand their ecological requirements. And I thank you really very much for your attention during this speedy talk, and I hope everything was clear. Feel free to ask any question. I'm still around. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nicolas. I think your excitement about bees was definitely noticeable, and I was thinking, every time I was thinking of a question, a few seconds later you would already answer that. So thank you very much for your very passionate presentation. And I really like the statement, you're worrying about the wrong bees. There are, however, some questions in the chat. I'll just post some of them to you. Stefania is asking, or saying, you already mentioned the risk of competition between domestic bees and wild pollinators. That is already creating some conflicts between some park managers and beekeepers that are not allowed to go into the protected area anymore. What do you think, and which suggestions can you give to the managers to avoid or manage these conflicts? Any experience?
Yeah, it's a really difficult issue because, in Brussels, beekeepers have been allowed and are still allowed to some extent to set up their hives in Natura 2000 sites, for instance. So I think, in a context of a city where the resources are scarce, I would be more in favor of protecting the bits of biodiversity that we have left. However, I think we also need to show some flexibility, and we know in Brussels, for instance, one of the key apiaries of the beekeepers is precisely located in Natura 2000 site, and I think historically they've been there. There's no reason to remove them from there. But I think we need to increase the awareness of the importance of the biodiversity issues. And if we want to protect biodiversity, it's by taking into account the wild bees and not the honeybees. Okay, so again, I'm not the beekeepers exterminator. You know, that's not my task at all. I just think we need to reasonably shift our attention, and also to take into account the fact that maybe without the beekeepers alerting of the devastating effects of some pesticides in the early 1990s, we would not have had our attention drawn to these issues. So I'm not saying that we should get rid of beekeepers. I just think that authorities and a lot of stakeholders should shift the attention away from the honeybee, which is doing fine, and we should be worrying about the honeybee, about the wild bees, which deserve a lot of attention and which are a source of wonder, of beauty, of function in ecological, in urban settings. And so this is where really things need to be happening in the next decades.
Thank you, Nicolas. Yeah, we can only hope that the honeybee might work as a sort of influencer for all the other bees that also, way more desperately need our help. There was another question coming in about the bee hotel, and if you think the way you hung the bee hotel influenced the amount of pollen that was collected.
Oh, they've all been set up the same way, with the same orientation towards the sun, at the same height, and so I don't see that. I don't see this really as being potentially a source of bias. I would say that the availability of pollen was probably more of an important driver rather than the orientation or the way that we put the bee hotels. We know bee hotels. We've used and known bee hotels for a long time, so we know how to set them up. And my students and my team have been really careful, to put everything the right way. So I don't see any source of bias there.
Perfect. And there was another question regarding the pollinating of plants, and if 2 species of wild bees are pollinating 84 different plants, 48, sorry, different plants, how many different plants are being pollinated by the honeybee? So the effect of the honeybee.
Well, the honeybee is an opportunistic species, So it also tends to collect pollen from wind-pollinated plants, and it's not necessarily pollinating those, but it's collecting pollen because there's so much pollen produced by trees that rely exclusively on wind pollination. The sheer amount of pollen that is there is a resource for honeybees. And honeybees also, they are good at pollinating some plants, but are really poor pollinators at the individual level in particular. For a lot of our crops, they also steal a lot of nectar. So they are far from being the queens of pollinators. We've actually demonstrated this many times, that they only win because of the number. Like at the individual level, they are really poor pollinators. It's only because of the sheer number of honeybees and workers in the environment that some pollination can be brought about,
Yeah, well, I can speak for myself. You're really opening my eyes here to the amount of difference between all the different bee species and the pollinating aspect. One final question before we move on to our last presenter. The question: if you have the Asian giant hornet in Brussels, and if yes, does it affect the wild bees?
So it depends on what you call the Asian giant hornet, because we have an Asian hornet, but it's smaller than the European hornet, so it's not exactly giant. We have Vespa velutina, Irithorax, which is the Asian hornet that has arrived in the southwest of France quite a while ago, and it has arrived now in Brussels since 2 or 3 years. of course, the beekeepers have been appalled, and of course, they are also trying to see how this can be solved. But I remember really vividly the first meetings where people were talking about this issue when the Hornet arrived in France. And some people at the EFSA, at the European level in Rome, they said, it's there and there's no way that we can completely get rid of it. And they said this, you know, like 15 years ago. There's no way that we can get rid of it. So we have to find a way to coexist with this species. And it's there because it has found a specific niche, particularly through the predation of honeybees. That also means that the honeybees are really abundant in the environment. And so I would say that the most shocking thing to do and the less useful thing to do would be to devote public money to the extermination of Vespa velutina. That's never going to happen, okay? Even if you pay salaries and salaries and salaries and millions to satisfy your local beekeepers, it's never going to happen. You should better spend your money into education, into the local destruction of nests that are of concern if they are close to a school or close to an apiary, etc. So, like a surgical hits would be a lot more sensible than trying to set up a whole strategy at the national level to exterminate Asian hornets. You know, we have a history with insects. Our species has tried to exterminate insects many, many times. How many times did it succeed? Not very, very often, you know. So it's about coexistence. We need to learn about how to coexist with these species. And of course, we need to protect the beekeepers if they feel like it's a real threat, which still has to be demonstrated for most of the areas. It's there, and I think investigating what it's doing would be probably money better spent than trying to eradicate it from the territory.
Great, thank you very much, Nicolas. There are some 2 or 3 more questions in the chat. Maybe if you still have some time, you can answer in the chat as well, because I do think they're very interesting. But just to be mindful of the time, we are now moving to Kitty Corsauzes. She is in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and the municipality of Utrecht became the bee-friendliest municipality in the Netherlands. And she will talk a little bit about all the actions that were put in place to achieve this status. So Gitti, if you're still there, the floor is yours.
Yes, I'm still there. I'm
Good.
sharing my presentation now, I hope. Oh no, wait. Sorry, wrong order. First I have to press this one and then I have to press that. If everything's correct, you see my presentation now?
Yep, looks perfect. Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. I hope everybody is still a bit awake because all these digital conferences usually take a lot of energy. At least I'm very awake because I found it very inspirational what Nicolas did in Brussels. This is something we haven't been able to do in Utrecht, but we needed it very badly. So thank you for your research. It's very welcome here. And of course, thank you for your invitation to show me a little bit about what we do in Utrecht for our wild bees, especially. I have a presentation prepared in which I first tell you a little bit about Utrecht, if my computer will allow it. Yes, it will. So I'll tell you a little bit about Utrecht, not too much because it's a lovely city, so it's better you just visit it, but just to give you a sneak preview. And then I will tell you something about our bee-friendly projects we have here, also a little bit about bee-friendly maintenance, and hopefully also a little bit about our bee-friendly future. If you have any great bee-friendly projects, new ideas, I'll certainly are happy to learn them. Maybe you can inspire me as well. So the city of Utrecht, I don't know how many of you know Utrecht, but it's the 4th largest city in the Netherlands. It's in the middle of in the Netherlands. And if you go by train to the Netherlands, you most certainly will pass Utrecht. And we're famous for our Dom Tower. We're very proud of it. At this moment, it is renovated, so it isn't as nice as you see it at this picture. But we're also famous for our old canals with wharves alongside them. And before our COVID pandemic, a lot of restaurants and terraces could be found near the water, and a lot of people enjoyed the view. And most recently, we also finalized the encircling of our city canal. So where you now see this big plastic whale, 5 years ago, there was still a highway with cars running there. So we're very proud that we finalized the canals, and now you can pedal a whole round around our inner city. And it also is very nice for people to sit on the stairs, enjoy the water. Of course, at 1.5 meter distance again, but that's another thing. In Utrecht, we try very hard to make healthy urban living something which is feasible for all our citizens. We did a lot of research in the health of our citizens, and we found out, for instance, that in 2 districts of the city of Utrecht, the life expectancy was drastically lower than in other districts of the city. And probably no coincidence, but these were also the low income areas, mostly of our city. So we're really raising the bar for ourselves to get the life expectancy in these areas higher. And we try to do that with adding green to the city, next to a lot of other things, of course. But green is my topic, so I'll focus mostly on green. Because in Utrecht, we also have the challenge of adding green and biodiversity in our city, which is also densifying, because a lot of people want to live in Utrecht. So we're building up to 40,000 new houses in the city of Utrecht, but we don't want to lower our standards on healthy urban living and also not on green in our city. So this is a big challenge, and this will need also different ways of working, innovation, and hopefully a lot of inspiring projects for the future. And of course, nature and biodiversity is at the heart of this challenge. So already last year we were declared the most bee-friendly city of 2020. This year, last week, the next city is declared the most bee-friendly city in the Netherlands. It's a different one, but we also had a special mention at the European Bee Awards, and I think the main topics for our bee friendliness is that we are not using pesticides for over 25 years. So this is something which was in political debate several times, and each time our aldermen kept the pesticides out of our public spaces. So we're very proud of that. We did a lot of bee-friendly innovation projects. I will tell you a little bit more about this in the next slides. And we're also maintaining our green at a bee-friendly manner. And we're improving each year, because I'm not going to say we're already perfect in this field, but we're learning, we're struggling, and we're getting better. I think that's the main idea. So the first bee-friendly project I would like to tell you about, it went viral all over the world. these were the bus stops. We have bus stops in Utrecht with a green roof. It's only sedum vegetation, but well, the whole world loved it. Of course, we did as well. But some critical persons, me included, are a bit skeptical about what it does for biodiversity. So the last year we investigated on the green roofs which bee species we found there. And we did find a lot of honeybees, we did find some bumblebees, but the really typical wild bee species we didn't see a lot. So this year we try to get more indigenous plants shown onto the bus stops. So these are sedum vegetation, which you can buy at any store almost. And we try to get this more bee friendly by adding seed of indigenous plants in the hope that also the wild bees will find more food on our bus stops. The results I don't know yet, so excuse me if I tell you this later, but we hope, of course, this will help. The good thing about this project is that it really opened up the eyes of our citizens as well. As a municipality, we have to set the example, and we had also a funding application for citizens to put a green roof on their own roof. And in 2019, we didn't have a lot of applications, but we really saw this grow enormously in 2020 when we put up the green roofs on our bus stops. So people see that we mean business, we really want to green our city, and they're now joining us. So this is very, very nice. Not the first topic we had in mind when we were greening our bus stops, but it's very nice to see everybody's joining in. You can find more information about the project on the internet page I put into the slides. So if you want to read this later on, then this is possible. Other way around, sorry. The bee-friendly bus stops we made by a smart procurement tender. And this is also what we did with an advertisement pole we needed to put next to our highway. Nobody's a very big fan of an advertisement pole. By making a lot of biodiversity and circular criteria into this tender or this procurement, we found a winner who made it really bee friendly. So there's a lot of bee hotels in it. If they all function very well, this is something, well, we're investigating, but at least the lower ones are helping the bees. Let's state it like that. But I don't think this is the way to rescue our wild bees or honeybees, but it does, again, open the eyes of our public. And I think that's the main profit we can find in this advertisement pool, next to the fact that it looks better than the normal standard advertisement pool. So the main message here is with smart procurement, you can make your city more bee friendly and also invite businesses to think about more bee friendly measures they can put into your city. This is already an old project. It's a wall next to a park which had a lot of, how do you call it? Not pesticides, but it was contaminated. That is how you say it. So we needed to isolate the contaminated soil, and to do that, we put a long wall. Our citizens were very afraid that it would be a lot of graffiti on the wall, and I think they were right. So we tried to prevent that by adding a brick wall next to the concrete wall. And we put a lot of holes in this brick wall. We put a lot of plants in it. A lot of volunteers did this. And some of the holes we left open and put only some soil in it. And it was facing south, so it really depends on the watering system which is behind the wall. But because it's facing south, it has a lot of flowering plants. They grow really well, very widely, as you can see at the other picture. But also the holes which only have soil in them are a very excellent place for wild bees to nest. Because in Netherlands, 80% of the wild bees are ground nesting bees. So all the bee hotels, of course, they help, especially in raising awareness. But 80% of our wild bees need the soil to make their nests. So this wall also helps in this. But putting ground nesting bees into our maintenance, that's another challenge. And I will talk about this a little bit later. So this is the Griffparkmuur, and it's certainly worth a visit in summertime, especially. And this is a project, well, it's not especially made for bees because it costs millions. But we have a highway running through our city. And it was next to a newly development area, and because of the noise barriers and the air pollution barriers, we couldn't build really near to it. So somebody decided or had the great idea to put a tunnel or a rooftop park on top of this highway, and that reduced the noise levels near the surroundings of this highway, and also improved the air quality. And by putting on a park onto the highway, we added more green to our city. We made it a really bee-friendly park, and it's really lovely to walk through it. So instead of a highway running through our city, we have now a highway park. And well, if you have some millions to spare, I would certainly suggest to do this. But maybe with some help from other parties. I think the main message I want to give you is that we really try to put as many indigenous plants in our projects as possible. We have some wild bees who are really typical in their diets. So they only eat the pollen of certain flowering species, not all of them. Like the honeybee, he collects its pollen from all the flowers he can find. But some wild bee species are very typical in their diet. And I think this is also the main take-home message I try to give with each project and with my citizens, that indigenous plants really help prevent the loss of biodiversity. So by putting as much indigenous plants in our project, we are really helping biodiversity, wild bees, and by that also, of course, the birds and everything else which is depending on our ecosystem. So in this photo, you see two different wild bee species, which are very typical for Utrecht. Well, I don't know if they're typical for Utrecht, but at least they're very typical in their diet. And by this, I can give the message to my project developers why they need to use indigenous plants. And I really see that this message is, how do you say it? Used in the project. So this really helps. It makes them understand a little bit better why they have to use indigenous plants and why this is helpful for biodiversity. So over to bee-friendly maintenance. If you want to keep as many pollinators, and it's not only wild bees, there's a lot of other pollinators, pollinating insects as well in our meadows. If you want to keep them in your city, one of the main messages is that you leave a part of your flowering meadows unmown. And this is a challenge in our city because we've trained our maintenance people to mow very exactly, very neatly, very accurately. And now they have to leave cuts of the pieces of the meadow uncut. And this is really against everything they learned in previous years. So this is a big challenge. But it's working every now and then, better or worse, of course. And this will help giving our, for instance, Fuller's teasel. This is a plant which needs 2 years to flower. And the years before it was always mown each year. And now we have certain parts where this plant can go grow flowers and also make seeds, and is also very popular with bumblebees and other wild bees. So these are very essential things in maintenance. And also because a part of the vegetation which hasn't been cut is a hiding place for pollinators to make sure that they survive the winter. They hide there, and in next spring they will well, come out of the vegetation again and start their life. So by saving these spots without cutting them, we really also save our biodiversity. And other way around again, sorry. Another big challenge is that we mow our lawns less frequent. So this will certainly in springtime give a lot of dandelions. And where we first always aimed at the grass is never longer than 7 centimeters, we now allow it to grow 15 centimeters maximum. So that it's still functional for people. They can still play soccer, they still can have their picnic. But just by adding some more weeks, you can see the mowers cutting a lot of dandelions, but also a lot of dandelions already made their seeds. So we're really, well, we're creating dandelion heaven. Those are not the most typical plants for a wild bee species, but for bumblebees and honeybees, they, well, they're very useful. And something which isn't very normal in our maintenance practice is to keep that wood into our parks instead of taking it out and leaving the park very neatly. We are now experimenting with, well, these type of structures where if we sow a tree or cut a tree, we sew it into pieces and we leave it in the park, not only for wild bees to make their nests, but also for amphibians or birds to find a hiding place or find food, of course, because where there are insects, there's food and there's also more life. So this is also something in which the organization is changing, where we first made everything very neat. We now are growing a little bit less neat and more nature friendly. So my last 2 slides are about a bee-friendly future. I recognize a lot of Brussels, which certainly in the inner city of Utrecht, there's a lot of bricks, there's a lot of stone, there's not a lot of green. And in these areas, you need the green areas the most, but the ground is very expensive. So it's very difficult to make a new park there. And I think a big success in Utrecht was that we allowed Wonderwoods to win the tender. It's near our city center, near our main train station. And it's a building with a lot of trees on top of it, a lot of trees in the balconies from people, but also on the 7th floor there will be a public park on the, well, not the completely roof, but somewhere along the building, where people can walk, drink some tea or jog, or just enjoy themselves in the green. Of course, we also put a lot of nesting boxes to make it even more nature friendly. And I try again in this project to get as many indigenous plants as possible to make it also friendly for wild bees and not only friendly for honeybees. But especially with landscape architects and building architects, it's a challenge to explain why they need to do that and which benefits there are. But well, I think it will be wonderful. They're still building it, so I only have this artist impression. But hopefully in 2 or 3 years, I will have a real picture of this building. And then our last topic, this is because of the bee-friendliest municipality of the Netherlands. We developed a plan to make bee burrows. As I said before, 80% of our wild bees are ground nesting bees. But it's very difficult for our maintenance people to leave part of the grass open with soil. It doesn't feel right for the people. They don't understand why there's no grass growing there. So we tried, or we're now developing a method to make some kind of a barrier with a lot of soil onto it, with probably also wood, so that it's very evident for our maintenance people that this structure belongs here, that it has a function, and that it's good that there's open soil there for the bees to nest in. And this will also hopefully explain to the citizens of our city that wild bees is not only something you find in your bee hotel, it's also something you find in the soil. And yeah, we hope to explain even more about wild bees near these bee burrows. So these are still pictures I borrowed from the internet. The artist impression is underway, but well, it's not there yet. So I hope you get an idea of what we're building here. And if you are interested in learning more about it, I'm happy to share all the information we have on these bee burrows. We developed them really to spread also the news about these bee burrows and hopefully make more room for ground nesting bees. Other side again. So this is it.
Awesome, Kitty. Thank you very much for your intervention here. Before we get to the questions in the chat, I just want to pick up on something that you were mentioning at the end as well. Maybe the uneasiness of people when they see empty areas or pieces of land that aren't mowed as we're used to, very short, very neat. What was the reaction of the inhabitants of Utrecht? Did you see any fallback, or was it mostly positive, or how did you perceive that?
Well, we saw both ways. Of course, a lot of people are questioning us. Why is the grass not mown? You left a part, you forgot a part. Please go back and mow it again. We did make a movie to explain, a short movie to explain people why we are doing this, and we try to share it as much as possible. But we also realize it takes time. But on the other hand, we also have a lot of citizens who are asking us, "Oh no, you cut all the flowers, like the dandelion fields I showed you." I really made a small movie to explain that we are indeed cutting the flowers, but that's 5 years before, we were mowing very neatly and very frequently. We didn't have these flowers. So what they're now seeing is that we're mowing flowers, but what they tend to forget is that 5 years ago, we didn't have these flowers. So because we are mowing less frequently, we have flowers, but now they see we're mowing the flowers, and now we get a lot of questions about why we are mowing the flowers. So this is a very complicated thing to explain.
Yeah.
But I am very happy that they are seeing the flowers and that they are seeing that we're mowing it, because then we can explain that there were no flowers beforehand and why we are mowing them. So I think it's a good thing, and I see that our citizens are getting more and more informed about wild bees. But we need to help them, and we need to make them understand why we're doing the things we're doing, and how they can do that themselves as well, of course.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, maybe catching on to that, there was a comment in the chat, scrolling up, if there were any complaints from citizens that were allergic or afraid to bees, and somebody already responded that especially wild bees usually do not cause allergic reactions, but yeah, maybe any comments that you received from inhabitants.
Well, we did have some people asking us about pollen. Also, the politics were a bit nervous about more flowering meadows, more pollen. Will it be very difficult for our citizens? So that's a risk or a difficulty we had to tackle. But wild bees usually are not stinging bees. Only the bumblebees and the honeybees are stinging bees. So the risk of getting stung is just the same as before. And the pollen issue, well, I'm not a health expert. Of course, if you're allergic to pollen, it's very difficult. But we're not going to exclude our city from all the green. And I'm no doctor, but I sometimes wonder by having even less green in our cities, that people get more allergic because they're not used to green anymore. But I'm no specialist at that topic, so I hope somebody else will research this for me. But yes, we did get some questions on these topics.
Yeah. There was another question about the geographical strategy or the priority for implementing bee-friendly equipment, and if there's a focus on mineral areas or any links with your city's ecological network, or if there's a more linear approach through bee corridors or community gardens.
I hope I understand the question correctly, but we try at least to get all our public space as bee-friendly as possible with as many indigenous plants as possible. We don't have a peculiar structure. We think everything should be bee-friendly. We do have restrictions on putting beehives in our own public space, but the difficulty is that the beekeepers just put them somewhere in a private garden or on top of a building, and we don't have any control over that. And we do assume there's some competition. So I'm very, as I said, very happy with the results of Brussels, their research, because this will really help us in Utrecht as well. But we see that also next to our natural areas, that beekeepers just put their beehives in a private garden next to the natural area, and nobody can say anything about it, and then you still have the honeybees in your nature areas, and that's not where you want them. But at this moment we cannot prevent this.
Sure.
Am I answering the question now, or?
HN, yeah, he's
Yeah.
raising his thumb, so
Thank you.
you passed.
Phew.
There was one more question, and then I think we're also reaching the end for today. About the indigenous plants. Do you involve in any way gardeners or companies, private owners of gardeners, or local shops, or how? Because I know also that there is sometimes issue with the quality of seeds and so forth. How do you go about getting these indigenous plants?
Well, we made a flyer with 5 solitary wild bee species, which are very peculiar in their diet. So I showed 2 in one of my slides. And this is also to make sure the citizens know which plants they can plant. There are also garden varieties of these plant species. So Campanula is, for instance, a plant species which can be found in very many gardens, but also a lot of wild species we have near Utrecht. Sorry. So with this flyer, we try to tell the message why they use indigenous plants and which species, for instance, they can use. And this flyer is aimed at gardens, not as much as private companies, but especially at citizens and also at facade gardens. So gardens near the front door of your house on the pavement. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I understand, but I'm Dutch, so it's maybe a bit unfair, but yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kitty. Just also with an eye on the time and the time that we allocated for everyone, I think there were some really interesting comments still in the chat, so I do welcome you to also have a look. Also, Kitty, if you're looking for maybe some inspiration and some more information on what's happening in other cities. For now, I want to thank all that participated. I want to thank, of course, especially our speakers for their great interventions. And of course, all that cared to join us today. We're always looking, of course, to improve what we do at EUROPARC, and this also includes our webinars. So I'm just putting the link in the chat to a very small survey with just a few questions, won't take you more than 2 minutes. And if you could just fill it out and give us your feedback on the webinar today, that would, of course, be very helpful to us. In the upcoming weeks, you will receive the recording. You will also receive the PowerPoints that were shared today, and any other useful links we will include into the email as well. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Do go to the EUROPARC website to check out what webinar is coming up next. And I'm looking forward to welcoming you all in some other event we organize. Have a nice afternoon.